Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Linux Mint Debian Edition 7 from start to finish. I'm just going to give a few details before we dive in so you know what you're getting yourself into. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, how to install the operating system, and then a general tour of the operating system at the end. I won't be going into specific application usage as that is outside of the scope of my guide today. All of the links I show off I will include in the description below, so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating system install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues, so you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on. If you need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Also, be sure to back up any data you might need before starting. Before I begin, I also want to mention that if you're feeling generous to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon. Every bit goes right back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive into it. Alright, so let's take a look at the system requirements. Now the page that I'm showing is technically for the beta, but this gives the information we need for the system requirements. So if we scroll down just a smidgen, so on the system requirements section, it mentions that you need 2 GB of RAM as an absolute minimum, 4 GB of RAM is recommended for comfortable usage. This should be pretty easy to reach these days. 20 GB of disk space with 100 GB recommended. My recommendation is if you've got a solid state drive, that'll definitely make things a lot peppier. And then a 1024 by 768 resolution, which again is pretty easy to come across these days. And then just make note of this on lower resolutions, press Alt to drag windows with the mouse if they don't fit in the screen. It doesn't mention anything on the CPU requirements. I recommend a dual core processor as a minimum. 4 cores would definitely help out, but 2 cores should get the job done. Anyhow, let's move on to downloading the Linux Mint Debian Edition ISO. So on Linux Mint's main page, if we go over to the download section, and then if we just move our cursor over to LMDE 7, click on that, and then here is where we can download it. So we'll click the download button, and then it's a 3 gigs in size. We'll scroll a little bit further down. There is the integrity and authenticity check that you can run after you download it if you want to. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to. But we'll scroll down a little bit here. Next is find the mirror that is closest to you. I'm just going to click on the Clarkson University one. While that's downloading, we can move on to downloading the tool that we're going to use to create a bootable USB drive boot media. So I like to use Rufus. You do have the option to use Etcher as well, but the thing is that Rufus is a very small standalone executable. You don't have to install it, whereas Etcher you have to install, and you may have to also install the dependency applications of the Visual C++ redistributable packages. So Rufus just makes it a one-stop shop, and it's completely up to you if you want to use Rufus or Etcher, but like I said, those are the pros and cons. Anyhow, unfortunately Rufus's website can have a lot of clickbait download links on it. If we scroll down about 1/3 of the way down the page, we should see the download section right here that mentions latest releases. Most users are going to choose this top one, which is the standard Windows x64 variant. There's the portable Windows x64 variant. I still have not found a use case to use this as once again the standard version is still a standalone executable, which in my opinion is portable in itself. There's the x86 version, aka 32-bit version if you're running an older version of Windows, or you've got like Windows 10 32-bit. And then below that is the Windows ARM64 for Windows on ARM devices. Anyhow, I'm going to download this top variant. So there's 2 things that we need to adjust, which are notorious for causing problems with getting Linux operating systems onto boot media in Windows. There is the autoplay function, which can sometimes try to start indexing files on a thumb drive while the files are being written, and that can cause corruption. The other one is going to be Windows Defender real-time protection. We are going to temporarily turn that off, keyword temporary. It's not doing any harm to the operating system at all, it's just a quick toggle that we will do. So let's start with the autoplay function first. So if you go down to the Start menu, and I will mention that these settings are the same in both Windows 10 and Windows 11. So if we go down to the Start menu, and then just type in the word Auto, and then it should come up with Autoplay settings as an option. Let's click on that. And then right here, use autoplay for all media and devices. Flip this to off. This is also one of those things that you can feel free to turn this back on after the fact, but at least for making the boot media, let's keep this off. So we can close out of that. And then next up is going to be Windows Defender, as I'd mentioned. Now with this temporary toggle off, what it's actually doing is it's going to make it so it buys us roughly 15 minutes before it turns on automatically, or if you reboot your machine. If you reboot your machine, it will turn back on automatically. So if we go down to the Start menu, and then type in Windows Security, and then here's Windows Security, let's click on that, and then Virus and Threat Protection, click on that, and then there's the Virus and Threat Protection settings, click on Manage Settings, and then right here, Real-Time Protection, so we're going to toggle this off, select Yes for the UAC prompt, and then we should get a little pop-up balloon in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's fine. We can click the X for that, and then we can close out of Windows Defender. So at this point, you can feel free to close out of the browser that you've been using for all of this, and then let's continue on with the process. I'm just going to go down to File Explorer. I'm going to pop open my Downloads folder. So at this point, let's plug in an 8GB or larger USB thumb drive. If you don't have a USB thumb drive on hand, I will have a link for one in the description below, which is for a name brand, inexpensive one that should get the job done. So I'm going to plug my thumb drive in and we'll continue on. Next, let's double click on Rufus. Select Yes for the UAC prompt. And ideally, Rufus will display your thumb drive in the top. If your USB thumb drive is not showing up in this device section, then I would recommend unplugging it, plug the thumb drive back in so it's firmly in place, close out of Rufus, and then go back in and see if it will detect it. If it's still not detecting it, leave the thumb drive plugged in, reboot your machine, and then see if it will be detected then. Again, if it's not showing, then go to File Explorer, this PC, locate the thumb drive, right-click on it, and select Format. One thing to mention at this point as well is make sure that there is no data on your thumb drive that you need. If there's any data on the thumb drive, please back it up before continuing on. You can type in whatever you want for a volume label, keep it as quick format, and click on Start. It'll take a few seconds and it should save successful, and then you can close out of that and then go back into Rufus and hopefully it will show up for you. If it's still not showing up and you have another thumb drive on hand, try that as well. Anyhow, in my case, everything is looking happy for the thumb drive section. So at this point, we'll click on Select and then locate the Linux Mint Debian Edition ISO that you downloaded. Click on Open. And then before we continue on, this is just another warning that if there's any data you need to back up on your USB thumb drive, please do so now because we are going to nuke everything on it. Continuing on, if you get this DBX update available, you can select Yes for this. And then we are going to leave everything as is in this section. I'm leaving it entirely up to Rufus to decide the configurations that we need set. So anyhow, once again, I'm perfectly fine with the data being destroyed on this thumb drive, so I'll click Start. And I do recommend you close out of everything and do not use any other applications while this is crunching. So that said, let's click on Start. And then if you get the pop-up mentioning that an ISO hybrid images has been detected, we'll leave it on the recommended setting, click on OK. And then there will be this pop-up about needing some files to pull down. We'll select Yes for that. And then we're also going to get potentially another download required, click Yes for that. And then the warning that it's going to destroy all the data on the USB thumb drive, I'm perfectly fine with that, click on OK. And at this point, let's just be patient as it writes everything to the USB thumb drive. Now if all goes well, we should see the green ready state. If you encountered any errors along the way, I would recommend just trying again. And if you still get errors, then it may be worth trying to re-download the ISO image. And if you're still getting errors, it might even be worth trying a different USB thumb drive. And just verify that the Windows Defender real-time protection is still temporarily disabled when you go to build that back up. Anyhow, everything looks good here, so I'm going to click on Close. So next up is, in my opinion, the most difficult part, and that is trying to get your machine to actually boot off of the USB thumb drive. Now, unfortunately, every make and model is always different in how you can get your machine to boot off of a USB thumb drive. Anyhow, My recommendation is Google your exact make and model machine, or if you built your machine, Google the make and model of your motherboard, and that will give you the information that you need in order to get the machine to boot off of the thumb drive. In my case, I'm using a Lenovo desktop, which at least for this model of it, uses the F12 key to get it to boot off the thumb drive. So I'm going to remove the thumb drive from this current machine I'm on and plug it into the machine that's actually going to get Linux Mint Debian Edition loaded onto it. I start mashing the F12 key right now to try to get into the boot menu that we need. Alright, and here we are. So every make and model is going to look different, but at least for mine, this is how it looks. The key thing to really look for is, I'll down arrow to this section. However, the key thing to look for is something along these lines, saying a USB HDD or USB hard disk drive, or it might say USB thumb drive, or it could even say USB virtual CD drive. One giveaway to what is needed is also double check what model it's showing for your thumb drive. So you can look for the model thumb drive right here and then choose that. Anyhow, I know this is the one, so I'm going to click enter for it. And I'm just going to move the up down arrow keys just to mention some things at this spot. So by default, it wants to boot off of the Start LDM 764-bit. There is the option to choose Start LDM 764-bit compatibility mode. This compatibility mode is for people with potentially NVIDIA graphics cards, or if you encounter issues during this installation process, then I recommend using the compatibility mode, and that usually does the trick for installing it. There's an OEM install for manufacturers. As it mentions, it's really for manufacturers or computers. Boot from next volume is an option. There's the UEFI firmware settings. If you go into this, this actually attempts to boot into your BIOS on your computer if you need to change up any settings. And there's also a memory test function. Anyhow, we are going to choose that top option. And like I said, if you go through these steps and anything errors out, come back into here and try it in compatibility mode. The screens that you're going to see through the process that I show are going to look basically the same between the two. It's just that the screen resolution might be lower on the compatibility mode. Anyhow, I'll hit enter to continue on. We'll wait for this to load into memory. Alright, so at this point it may seem like Debian is already installed. However, what we are looking at right now is called a live CD or live environment, where it's actually just loaded the operating system into memory. The downside to this is that the performance of it is not as great as it is if it's actually installed. The other thing is that anything you customize for configurations, or you download or install something, none of that will persist through a reboot. However, in this state, there is one thing that I do recommend you configure during the installation process, and that is making sure that this machine is actually connected to the internet during the setup installation process so it can pull down any updates and things like that. Now, I personally recommend, if possible, to plug the machine into a hardwired Ethernet cable. If that's not possible, because it's either if your computer is too far away from your router, or the machine does not have an Ethernet port on it, then you can still connect into wireless. Let me show you the wireless configuration for that. So in the bottom right hand corner, you're going to see this little network icon. Left click on that, and then hopefully if you are connecting into wireless, that it actually shows wireless and that it gives you options to connect to different wireless networks. I'll have this partially blurred out. However, all you'd have to do is click on the wireless network that you want, type in the password for it, and then it should connect for you. If you are trying to use the wireless option that I'm mentioning here and it's not showing wireless, you may have to go into the BIOS and turn off fast boot or fast startup, and then try this process again of loading it back up. Anyhow, in my case, mine is plugged in via Ethernet. It just happens to have a wireless card in it as well. So with us connected to the internet, let's double click on Install Linux Mint and then wait for this to load up. And then we should see Welcome to LMDE 7, and that's going to say this program will ask you some questions and install LMDE on your computer. Let's click on Let's Go, and then we can maximize this. I'm just going to drag this up so we can actually see the buttons down below. So first things first, choose the language that you need, and then click on the next button. So I'm going to leave mine on English because that works for me. Click on Next, and then next up is the time zone configurations. Now for one, you can actually click on the world map, and it will set your time zone automatically. And then if you click in the continent section, then you can choose your continent and then cities and whatnot, or countries. I'm going to leave mine as is and I'll click on next. Next up is the keyboard layout setting. So you can choose the locale that's best for you, and then there's also a variant. You can also type down below if you want to test your keyboard configuration. Anyhow, mine looks fine. I'm going to click next. And then it's going to ask you for user account information, and that is who are you? So I'm going to type in my name. And then you have the section where you can set your computer's name. I'm just going to set mine to LM Desktop for Linux Mint Desktop, but you can feel free to set whatever name you want here. And then there's the username section. So by default, it usually takes the first name of your name and tosses it down here. However, if you want to alter this, you can delete it out, type in whatever you want here. And then I do recommend that you put in a very strong password if possible. For the sake of this video, I'm going to put in a weak password, but do not do that. And then confirm it. And then the section below is showing that you can choose to log in automatically or leave the default, which is require my password to log in. I recommend you keep it on require my password to log in. That way it prompts you for credentials every time you go to log into the machine. There is also the option to encrypt my home folder. I'll leave that up to you if you want to check that or not. In my case, I'm going to leave it as is. We'll click on next. Now this video is strictly going over installing the operating system as the only operating system on the machine. So this is not a dual boot guide. At some point I may create a dual boot guide for this, but at least for this video, like I said, we are nuking the drive, all the data on it, and the operating system, and just strictly installing Linux Mint Debian Edition on it. Anyhow, at this section, we're going to leave it on automated installation. We'll click this little drop down, we'll select our hard drive. There is the option to use LVM, or logical volume management. You can encrypt the operating system if you wanted to, and you can also fill the disk with random data. You can feel free to research these if you feel these are necessary for you, but I'm going to leave this as is, and we'll click on next. And then this is just a warning that it's going to delete the data on the drive. And this is another case where if you have any data you need to back up on the machine, you can hit no, back out of this, boot back into the machine, back up the data, and then go through the steps that we went through previously. In my case, I don't have anything on the machine, so I'm going to click on yes. And then I'm going to leave this as is on where we're installing the grub boot menu, and then we'll click on next. And then this is just a summary screen showing basically what is going to be set and configured. In my case, that all looks fine to me. I'll click on install. And then at this point, it's really just sit back and wait for this to crunch. I would recommend coming back in maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and then it should hopefully be done for you. Or you can sit and watch the little slideshow that it's got, or click through the slideshow to see what it's going to show you. Anyhow, we will continue on once this is done. And if all goes well, we should see installation finished. And then it will mention, do you want to restart your computer to use the new system? If you get any errors at this point, I would just try the installation process again. If you're still getting errors, it might be worth trying to either rebuild your USB thumb drive with a fresh downloaded ISO, or try to build it up on a different USB thumb drive. Key thing also, just make sure that Microsoft Defender real-time protection is still turned off during that build-up process. Anyhow, we'll click on yes for this to reboot the machine. You're going to get this screen that says remove the installation media, press enter. In this case, it actually just went right past that for me, so I'm going to pull the thumb drive right now, and then I'm just going to use the up-down arrow keys to break the 4 or 5 second auto boot. So by default, it would usually automatically boot to the LMDE 7 GG, or there's the advanced options for LDM 7 GG, and then there's the UEFI firmware settings. We're just going to leave it as the default, hit enter. You generally don't have to do anything at that point, but just let it crunch through the 4 or 5 seconds, then it will automatically boot to it. And then we should hopefully see the Linux Mint logo. And now we should see the login screen. So let's type in our password and hit enter. And then you should be met with this welcome to Linux Mint window. You can feel free to take a look through the Let's Go section, and it'll give you a bunch of good information if this is your first time diving in. Key thing is make sure to uncheck this once you are done with the welcome thing, otherwise this will pop up every single time you log into the machine. So I'll close out of that. So at this point, Linux Mint is in fact installed on the machine, and you are basically done at this point. However, if you want to keep watching, I'm going to give a general tour of the operating system if you want to see at least the basic overview of it. So before we really continue on with the tour, if you take a look in the bottom right hand corner, there's this little shield icon. It says welcome to Update Manager. If you hover over it, notice how it's got that green little dot on it. Let's left click on that, click OK for this, and then it does give you the option to change up your local mirror. Let's do that real quick. So let's select yes, type in your password, hit enter, and if you click in the main GG mirror, then give it a moment and it will actually kind of do a speed test for all the mirrors. So give this some time and then we can choose the fastest mirror for us. I'm just going to choose this top one, which is the fastest for me. I'll click apply. And then you can also change up the base, which is Debian Trixie. So we'll click this. Once again, it's going to do a speed test. And then I'll just give it a moment and choose the fastest one. And I'll choose this top one, which is the fastest for me. I'll click apply. And then with that done, let's click here to update apt cache. This is just going to check to see if there's any new application updates and whatnot. And there's a bunch of other information in here that you can take a peek at. I would just recommend doing a little bit of research if you're going to change any of this stuff up, as leaving it as is should be perfectly fine. Besides, like I said, just changing up the mirror so that it speeds things up a little bit. We'll close out of this for right now. I'm just going to click on refresh one more time just to make sure that in fact there are no new updates. And in this case there are now. So let's go ahead and pull these updates in just so that we have all the bug fixes and whatnot ready to go before we continue on with this tour. And if you do continue to get this pop-up about the local mirror stuff, we can click no now. And then let's just click on install updates, type in your credentials, hit enter. And if you want to see details on what's happening, you can take a look at this and it'll just show you the terminal side of things. And system is up to date, but let's refresh one more time just to make sure. All right, that looks perfectly fine. Now in a normal scenario, I would recommend anytime you actually do updates to reboot the machine so that it is fresh. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to do that right now, but just my recommendation. Anyhow, let's start in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you take a look at the system clock, there actually is one more section in the right-hand corner, and if you can kind of see it, the little block that's highlighted now, and as you can see it says show the desktop. So if you have a bunch of stuff open, I'll just open these right now. So let's say we've got a bunch of stuff open and you want to view the desktop, then go down to the bottom right, click on that. It will hide the applications that are open. They're still running behind the scenes. And then if you want to bring them back, click it one more time and they will come right back up for you. Close out of those for right now. And then next over on the left is going to be your date and time. So if you left click on this, it's going to show you your events that you might have set for specific days on the calendar. And then on the right hand side, as you can see, it's a calendar. You got your date, day of the week, your year, all that good stuff. You can also toggle between months and years. And then in the left is the date and time settings, which I'll go over that in a little bit more detail once we get to the settings section as a whole. I'll click out of that. Next over on the left is going to be your volume icon. If you left click on this, this will show you your volume slider. So you can adjust your volume. If you left click on the speaker icon, that will mute it. And then to unmute, you do have to move the volume slider for it to give you sound again. There's also the sound settings section down below. Next over on the left is the network section, which I showed off briefly during the installation process. So if you've got an Ethernet controller on your machine, you'll see the wired option at the top. You can toggle it on and off. And then if you have a wireless controller in your machine, then you're going to see wireless and you can toggle that on and off as well as connect to a wireless network within range. And again, I'll have this partially blurred out. And then there's network settings and network connection options, which again, we'll see in the main settings section. And then the shield is your update manager, which I showed off briefly. And then to the left of that, if we click on this, which is your reports or system reports. So this is going to just report a bunch of options currently that are available. For one, it's the install language packs, which quite frankly, I'm going to select and then type in your credentials, hit enter, let that pull down. The other thing is install multimedia codecs. So just as it mentions, multimedia codecs are required to play some video formats and to properly render some websites. I strongly recommend that you do install the multimedia codecs, so I'm going to do so right now. And the next thing is to set up a system restore utility. I'm going to skip this. However, if this is something you would like to tackle, then feel free to dive into it. It's pretty straightforward. So in my case, I'm going to click on ignore this report and OK for that. And then we can close out of that. And notice how the icon for it has now disappeared because at this point we have kind of cleared out that pile up of reports. So next up, let's go over to the furthest left-hand side. So you've got the Linux Mint menu over here, or the start menu if you're coming from the Windows world. Starting at the top left, you're going to have Firefox, which is the default browser that comes with Linux Mint. You'll have your software manager, system settings, terminal, files, lock screen. So lock screen gives you the capability if you have a bunch of applications open, or if you're logged into the machine but you want to step away but secure the workstation, then you can click lock screen. It will bring you back to the login screen. However, any applications you have open will continue to be running behind the scenes. So you would just log back in and then all those applications would be right there waiting for you to continue whatever you're doing. Below that is log out. So this is where you can log out of your user account. And then there's shutdown as the power options. And then in the top section here, you're going to have the search bar. So this is where you can search for specific applications if you wanted to, or even settings for that matter. So you've got all applications, which of course is going to show you every single application that is installed on this machine. And then you've got your subcategories for applications. So you've got accessories, graphics, internet, Office, which LibreOffice is the default Office suite on Linux Mint, sound and video, administration, preferences, places, and recent files. Recent documents is blank because we haven't actually opened anything yet. Before we do get out of this, I didn't click on Firefox before because we're going to click on it in just a little bit later, but there is the software manager. So if you click on this and give it a moment just to generate the cache, I'll maximize this. But anyhow, software manager is basically an app store. This is where you have kind of a one-stop shop to be able to download various applications without having to hunt them down on the internet. So it's pretty snazzy. If you take a look in the top left, there is a search feature. So if you wanted to, for instance, install Steam, then you can do a search for Steam. And as you can see, everything that's related to word Steam is going to show up. And then if you scroll down a little bit, then there's categories you can choose from. You're going to see top rated applications, things like that that you can choose from. Anyhow, feel free to really dig in, take a look at some applications you might want to download. We'll close out of that. We'll go back to the menu here. And so system settings, which we will go into in just a little bit here, is just the other thing I just wanted to mention, is kind of the main area to click on that. Anyhow, to the right of that is going to be your files. I'll maximize this. So these are the files that are associated just to your user account. So in my case, the digital account, these are the files for it. If someone else logged into this machine, then the files would be different and they wouldn't necessarily be able to access your files without your credentials. Anyhow, on the left-hand side here, you've got home, which is where we start off by default. There's desktop, documents, music, pictures, videos, downloads, recent, the file system. So this is the main file system. Note the little bar that's underneath here. This is actually kind of your free space bar. So if this starts darkening up, then that's the amount of space that's being eaten up. You can also tell the free space of your machine by taking a peek down at the bottom section here. You've got your trash, so if there's anything in the trash, you can empty it. Or if there's something you want to restore, you would highlight it, click the restore selected items, and they will go right back to where they originated from. And then there's the network section. If you click in here, any discoverable computers or servers that are on your network will show up in here. Anyhow, we'll close out of that. And then over to the right is Firefox web browser, which I'll click on just to launch it. Now the thing is that even though it's installed on here and you don't want Firefox, you can certainly feel free to download a different browser if you're choosing. But like I said, Firefox is the default browser on Linux Mint. So at least this gets you going until you can decide on a different browser if you wanted to. And just to quickly set this up, I'm just going to uncheck import from previous browser, click on save and continue. You have the option to personalize if you wanted to. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here because of my resolution being so low right now. We'll click on skip this step. And then if you want to sync your data across devices, you can. I'm just going to click start browsing. And then at this point, you can just feel free to start browsing the web in Firefox land. Anyhow, I'm just going to close out of this. And then to the right of Firefox is going to be Terminal. So if you need to do anything in Terminal, this is going to be your easy place to access it. The biggest thing with Linux is a lot of people get scared away thinking that they have to do a bunch of stuff in Terminal, but these days with the application manager and whatnot, there's not really a use case for Terminal for basic computer usage. Anyhow, we'll close out of that. And before we get into the settings, I just want to show some other things here. So if you right click on the desktop, you have the option to create a new folder, create a new document, create a new launcher here, add desklets. You can change your desktop background. You can go into your display settings. You can open in Terminal, open as root, and you can customize. If you copied something or cut something, you can paste it, or it also would potentially give you the option to copy or cut something if you right clicked on a document or something of that sort. And then if you right click in the system dock or system taskbar or tray down here, you have panel settings, applets, panel edit mode, move, remove, add to new panel, troubleshoot, which gives a few options here, and then there's system settings. And since we're diving into system settings next, this is one spot to select it, or go down to the menu, and then you can select system settings or control center up here. And I'll maximize this. So I'm not going to go through every single section that's in here. Everything is pretty self-explanatory into what they do. I'm just going to show off kind of some key ones that you may want to take a peek at. So the first one would be your backgrounds. Now if you right clicked on the desktop, you could have selected your desktop background that way. So this is going to allow you to change up your desktop background if you wanted to. There's different wallpapers to choose from, and I'll just choose the square because why not? And as you can see, it just changed it to that. Feel free to select whatever you want for a wallpaper. If you wanted to, you can also add pictures that you might have. So yeah, we can close out of that. One thing also to mention is there is a search bar up here. So if you wanted to search for a specific setting, type it in here and it should hopefully find it for you. Anyhow, we will scroll down. If you do have a Bluetooth controller in your machine and you want to sync a Bluetooth device, then here's your Bluetooth section. There's the mouse and touchpad configurations if you need to alter those. There's also the power management section, which actually let's go into that. So you have the power options at the top, which are to turn off the screen when inactive for, by default mine at least is set to 30 minutes. Feel free to change that. Suspend when inactive for, I'm on a desktop, so I'm going to leave mine as never. However, if you're on a laptop, you may want to choose something different so that it doesn't just burn through your battery power if you step away from it while it's on. And then there's extra options like when the power button is pressed, it's going to ask you to do something. You can feel free to change it to one of these other options. Enable hybrid sleep is turned on. Once again, if that's something you don't want, you can turn it off. Enable hibernate after suspend, that's an option. And there's also power mode. So power mode, I usually leave mine on balanced because balanced usually has the decent consciousness of going into more of a performance mode when need be, and then going back to almost like a power saver mode when there's not a huge amount of resources that are needed to crunch applications or whatnot. Now, if you are someone who wants raw performance at all times, you can choose this. It's obviously going to use more power. It's going to create more heat. Or maybe you're on a laptop and you're trying to conserve your battery power as much as you can out on the road. Then you can choose power saver mode. That's going to dim the screen. It's going to potentially throttle your processor so it's slower. But once again, your goal is to have a working machine, but keep the battery alive as long as you can. Anyhow, I just want to show that off. We'll go back. Here's the printer section if you needed to add a printer. Here's the sound settings section if you needed to custom configure anything in that. And then there's the users and groups. If you double click on this, type in your password. And this is where you can actually add more accounts if you wanted to, or you could also delete accounts. If you left click on this, it's going to give you information on your account or the account that you select. Since this is the only account we have on the machine, administrator is what is set by default, but you can add a picture and all that good stuff, change up what the account type is. And then there's also the group section where you can add groups to the accounts if you wanted to. We'll close out of that, and we can close out of that. So that's all you need to do to install Linux Mint Debian Edition 7 from start to finish. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.